Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can already tell I'm sighing at the beginning intro, John. Long week already as the Cincinnati Bengals. They had the last game of week 4, if you even want to call it a game. The Bengals took quite the beating from the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football. Not quite what a lot of people expected, but it is what it is. We will talk about that from a number of different angles as well as some other topics going forward. First, I got to check in with you, John. How are you, John Sheeran? That was not a fun one to watch.
I have a group chat of me and 3 of my friends. 2 of them are Bengals fans. One of them is a Browns fan. And, whenever the Bengals and Steelers play, the Browns fan always roots for the Bengals and whatnot. I just remember, I think texting late in the first quarter, something like that. I was like, one of these teams look like they're not used to playing well in the primetime game. And I was referring to the Steelers. And I was honestly just there was just a point in this game where I'm thinking maybe, this is going to turn out a little bit different than I'm thinking. And then, the old Bengals kind of showed up. So once that really settled in, it was just kind of just a laughing matter in my expense. And really, it was just, it's not anything new, man. It really isn't. And I guess this was a game that a lot of us thought was going to tell if things have really changed. And as we could see, not much has changed. Or maybe they have changed, and maybe they've changed for the worse.
That's kind of my thought. We'll talk about the Steelers game and what that rivalry, quote unquote rivalry, looks like at this point in time. Some of the things we saw in that game, as well as, we got to talk a little bit of quarterback stuff. So we will talk about that. There's also quite a bit of news and notes in terms of injuries and everything coming up with the Bengals. What does that mean for the team going forward? Is this team looking like they're in tank mode based on who they're placing on IR and all of that? We'll talk a little bit about that. We will also preview week 5 with former NFL tight end and current Cardinals podcaster for the Believe Cardinals Network, Ed Smith. He was part of the Dirty Birds back in the late 90s with the Atlanta Falcons, and excited about that. John arranged that interview so we're excited to talk to him, talk about the Cardinals again, not a team that we see very often from the Bengals side of the fence, and they are currently experiencing a new head coach with a number 1 overall draft pick in Kyler Murray at quarterback. So that's going to be an interesting conversation with Ed Smith. And we're going to try and lighten the mood maybe at the end of the episode. So stick with us for that. We want to get to listener questions. I know a lot of people got a lot of things on their mind. We've received a ton of texts this week, John. I've received some emails this week. There's a lot of stuff to talk about because of the volume of what we have to talk about. And we want to get to as many of those as possible. We are going to do a listener questions episode this Friday afternoon, evening. So join us as you usually do on our YouTube channel and on CincyJungle.com, as well as CincyJungle.com's Facebook page. We do the simultaneous streaming now. So we're going to do that at the end of the week, also to kind of tee off your football weekend. So we wish we could get them all into one episode, but there are a lot of comments, a lot of questions, and frankly, it's just kind of too much to put in at the end of an episode. So we want to make a standalone episode for that, and we will be bringing that to you Friday afternoon, Friday evening, and we hope you can join us. So, John, as we kind of teased at the beginning here, not a good showing by the Bengals, and I kind of felt that this game was a little bit doomed, even after a positive play. I felt that this game was a bit doomed for Cincinnati when they got that fumble recovery deep into Pittsburgh territory and they couldn't punch it in. You have your best red zone guy and Tyler Eifert. Difficult catch, but a makeable one. Probably the best throw, really, Andy Dalton threw all night. Went right through Tyler Eifert's hands, a catch he should have made. And that to me kind of, the Bengals got 3 points, but that to me kind of symbolized, you know what? This team is not ready to play. This team is not capitalizing on opportunities that a struggling team needs to do in order to right the ship. And unfortunately, it turned into a similar script where the Steelers ran all over the Bengals. I think if you really want to encapsulate the game, John, there was a play by James Conner where he ran through many tackles of the Cincinnati Bengals and stepped on the head of Andrew Billings as he was running through a crowd of Bengals defenders. Andrew Billings is arguably the biggest guy on the Bengals team, and he got basically pancaked and stomped on by the running back. If that doesn't scream Steelers over Bengals, I don't know what does.
Yeah, that was definitely a point of recognition right there, because after that failed red zone trip where they got 3 points, which was essentially an L for the offense if you have the ball inside the 20 to start off and you end up with only 3. The Steelers then came out in a lot of, I think they went wildcat, I think twice on the ensuing drive, and you're thinking, okay, this is a wrinkle, and my thought was right then, okay, yeah, the Steelers are definitely scared of Mason Rudolph right now, and that's an advantage that the Bengals could have exploited. And from then on, the pass rush for the Bengals was non-existent. And it wasn't like last week against the Bills where they pressured Josh Allen and they just got gassed as the game went on. They had minimal impact on the game. And the Steelers, stretched them out horizontally just like the 49ers did a couple weeks ago. Only this time it was in a different flair where they had either Jalen Samuels or James Conner as the quarterback, and they just had a bunch of jet sweeps and end arounds and all this other stuff. And it didn't work initially. The defense kind of caught on to it. But it was good game playing by the Steelers, because eventually as the game went on, it worked, and the Bengals just could not counter offensively at all. And that 3-and-out in the red zone was just the start of the total ineptitude that we saw. And the one successful drive that they had in that first half, beyond just the first drive that unfortunately ended up in a punt, it ended up in a strip sack because Andre Smith got completely obliterated off the edge by Bud Dupree of all people, who can't beat anybody in this league unless you're Andre Smith playing left tackle. So yeah, it was the Steelers coming out with a perfect game plan that eventually, as the game went on, worked perfectly. And I think James Conner had almost 100 yards by halftime, and Jalen Samuels had almost 100 yards as well. And Mason Rudolph just had to do nothing but just throw a couple 5-yard passes here and there, and they just kept the ball moving. And it was a complete and total ineptitude on all 3 phases of that team. And you have to wonder, is this a question of were they just not mentally prepared once again in a primetime situation, or is this just them just being bad all throughout the roster? And honestly, I think it's more of the latter than the former.
You provided 2 good segues to the next 2 topics we're going to talk about. And in this loss, the coaching has to be called into question a bit. You mentioned, I saw someone in the live Facebook feed there, I think it was our friend Dalton there, saying, accountability is being talked a lot about by these coaches, by this team. I find it, last week, it's kind of a tale of 2 different things. Last week, we were all over Dalton for making some bad throws. We'll talk about him in just a second. Last week, we were kind of, first half, the coaching wasn't so great, but the Bengals rallied late. They made some plays. They did some things. So we kind of we were a little easier on the coaching staff. To me, this week, between the offensive line coach, between the defensive coordinator dropping Andrew Billings and Sam Hubbard into zone coverages a handful of times, between Zach Taylor giving this impassioned speech at the end of after the Bills game saying, we're so close, we're so close, we're so close, and the team's response is to get absolutely embarrassed. I have to wonder if this staff is completely over its skis right now. Zach Taylor looked rattled last Monday. He looked absolutely rattled. He's a young guy. He's a first-time head coach. He's been an assistant in the league, but first-time head coach. Biggest game always on the Bengals docket, and on the biggest stage, their lone primetime game, yet again, they fail. You bring up an interesting point about the primetime. Is this just were they just not prepared? To me, I think it's talent, and I think it's a lack of preparation, and I think coaching has a lot to do with what we saw in that 27-3 result.
Right. And I know people are going to talk about the offensive line, and the offensive line was completely abysmal. I had to watch all that today for a film review, and it was just, I wanted to gag myself by the end of the second quarter.
Right.
But we've seen other teams, well-coached teams, work around weaknesses on their own roster. People forget that the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl without their starting left tackle and starting quarterback. The Steelers are now in 3 weeks into having their backup quarterback play, and honestly, their offensive line has regressed a little bit from last year because they lost their offensive line coach. That wasn't the problem in this game. They completely had a game plan to completely work around the weaknesses of their own quarterback and of their offensive line and the lack of weapons that he has to throw with. And they just ran train on the Bengals for the entire last 3 quarters of that game. And it was just so simple. And it's not anything new if you're familiar with how the Steelers prepare themselves in primetime situations, not against the Patriots, and specifically against the Bengals. The Bengals haven't beaten the Steelers since 2015. They've lost to the Bengals now only three times in this decade. The Bengals have one more chance to not be, completely under 500 in the 2010s in the Marvin Lewis in what was mostly the Marvin Lewis era. This isn't anything new, unfortunately. And yeah, the Steelers had weaknesses that the Bengals could have exploited, but we talked about, the strengths of both of these teams was on the defensive line. One of the defensive lines completely shut down an offensive line. One of the defensive lines was completely, disappear, invisible in this game. And that was honestly the difference.
That was definitely the difference. The difference also, and you can attribute this to the offensive line most definitely. The difference was in the tale of two quarterbacks. Mason Rudolph missed 4 passes. 4 the entire night. He was 24 of 28, 2 touchdowns. And was he throwing deep ball dimes? Was he throwing? No. It was a dink and dunk thing. And and this is always what the Steelers say after they win. This is what the Ravens say after they beat the Bengals. You got to let the Bengals be the Bengals. And unfortunately, in years that they are down, like a year like this, they will say, hey, tackle us. Just do something simple. Tackle us and stop us. That's it. And the Bengals could not do that. They could not tackle. I can't even tell you how many missed tackles I counted that night. I lost count. There were so many missed tackles, handfuls of tackles on a single run play that were missed. One-on-one, you're in, sometimes you're not even really in a big space. You've kind of got the guy trapped towards the sideline a bit, and you still miss the tackle. They extend the play to get a first down. It's maddening. That to me is effort. That to me is coaching. Yes, it's also a lack of talent, but at the NFL level, guys can tackle. I mean, that should be a given. And this team is showing shades. You may be a bit younger, John, to remember some of these, but this to me looked a lot like 2001, 2002. This looked a lot like 90, 98, 99. This was an inept performance by this team from top to bottom. And you said it very well when you said that all 3 phases failed. Now, talking about, I'm going to play an audio clip in just a minute. And I'll set that up in just a second. But before I do, let's talk about quarterback play. I mentioned Mason Rudolph missed 4 passes, whereas Andy Dalton is a broken man. He is a broken man. He looks visibly upset. You saw him throw his helmet on the sideline. His face is showing massive amounts of frustration. He was sacked 8 times. And now, John, as we sort of touched on last week, he is developing bad habits, and I think it's directly correlating with this offensive line play. The head down, not looking to extend a play after breaking pressure, the lack of velocity on throws because he can't step into throws because he doesn't have time, or he is hearing pressure that is not there. There are a myriad of issues with Andy Dalton right now, some of which are of his own doing and some of which are being caused a domino effect, if you will, from the offensive line.
People want to talk about David Carr effect, and this is honestly what it is. It started in 2016 when an offensive line first started, teetering on the verge of collapsing. And then 2017 is when everything combusted. And PFF Cincinnati's Evan McPhillips, I think is his name. He runs the PFF Cincinnati account. He pulled up adjusted completion percentage and passer rating in a clean pocket since 2017, 2018, and now 2019. Dalton has been a bottom 5 quarterback from a clean pocket. Now we're talking about this guy can't operate without a good offensive line. Even when he does have time, he's just not the quarterback that he was in 2015 and 2016. And that's honestly just, like you said, it's a mental thing. It's him just developing bad habits because he's basically his mental, capacity as his internal clock, his pocket presence. It's all regressing to an even worse point where it was before all this happening. He was never a great pocket manipulator, even in his young days, but he was much better than he was now. Now it's just completely inaccurate and bad decision making, and just nothing that is worthy of sustaining a solid offense in the NFL, even without your best pass catcher in AJ Green. Now you have an offense that is without AJ Green, that is without a player that we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. You're preserving Tyler Eifert because you're scared he's going to get injured. You don't have a lot of viable pass catchers outside Tyler Boyd, and you don't have a lot of athletic pass catchers who can get separation really quickly, and you have an offensive line that can't protect for more than 2 seconds. So when you're forced to have a quarterback standing in the pocket for more than 2.5 seconds and he doesn't trust his protection and you're not having receivers open, then it comes down to, okay, how can we as play callers, as scheme makers, develop a scheme that can get the ball out quickly, even if the talent isn't there? And that's honestly on Zach Taylor and Brian Callahan. And I appreciate Taylor having some accountability earlier this week, saying the bad play calling was kind of on me. I didn't do as good of a job. Well, they have to see results if they want this offense to move anywhere fast with all these injuries that they're dealing with.
Yeah, Nathaniel on the live YouTube chat says he's Kitna, just say it. No, I'm not going to say it because he's not Kitna. This is a two-way street. Dalton is not living up to some of his ends of the bargain. And the team, we said this last week. I said this in reaction posts. The team has not lived up to their end of the bargain in terms of propping up Andy Dalton, as they said that was their game plan with him all along. They failed on the offensive line. They let critical players leave, both on the offensive line. You can even look back. Nobody really talks about this as much as the offensive line, but he had a great rapport with Marvin Jones and Mohamed Sanu that were good supplemental players to A.J. Green. That trio was a nice trio. They let both of those guys leave. And granted, they got Tyler Boyd, who took a couple of years to develop, but they got him, and they've got a bunch of besides that, especially when A.J. Green is out. So, that's a two-way street to me. And Andy Dalton has proven he can win in this league, but he's proven he can win in this league when there is talent and there is protection. And that's not happening right now. And now what you're seeing are the development of some bad habits. I guess before we move on to some further and a different avenue of the quarterback conversation, John, I want to say this. How much did this, as a fan, how much did this one hurt your psyche in terms of, where is this team headed? Is this staff the right staff? And, they've been the Steelers' whipping boys for a long time. This was a chance, at least temporarily, to turn things around and make people feel pretty good about the direction of this team, especially in that quote-unquote rivalry. And they got embarrassed.
I mean, it depends on what your psyche was going into this one. For me personally, my psyche's damaged goods ever since the 2016 playoff game by the hands of the Steelers. So the Steelers beating the Bengals, embarrassing or not, in primetime or not, is nothing new to me. And they can't hurt me any more than they already did. Granted, it was on my own accord, but still the point remains. I didn't think that they were a good team going into this game. I know people had hope because 2 of the 3 other losses were by a combined 5 points. They were dealing with a lot of injuries, and certain aspects of their team were close to getting there, but just not there. They're just not a good team. And they were completely outcoached and out-schemed by a team that constantly beats them, and it just won't get any better until it does.
Yep. So there's a lot to talk about here. We're getting a call right now. Unfortunately,
Don't call in right now. Don't call in right now.
Yeah, we've got someone calling in. We've got a special guest calling in, so we can't get to that call, unfortunately. So we will try and get back to you at. We'll try and get to calls later in the show if we're able. Otherwise, we're going to have to try and save those for a listener question special episode, as I mentioned at the top of the show here. So here's the thing. Here's the thing, John. There are a number of talking heads now pointing at the quarterback position of the Bengals. Moving on, obviously Andy Dalton did not look good on Monday Night Football. The Bengals are poised to have a top pick in a quarterback-heavy draft. So I wanted to play this clip. I don't know if you've listened to it or heard it yet.
I had, actually.
Okay. I have to preface this that this is a clip from ProFootballTalk.com with Mike Florio and Peter King, 2 notorious guys who dog the Bengals, especially Peter King. I have not been, and I would tell him this if we ever have him on the show. I'd love to have him on the show, but I have not been I've been a fan of Peter King's career. I respect the hell out of what he's done with him, with his sports writing career and what he's done as being a household name. But, I don't always like how he has portrayed the Bengals, and it goes back to his days with covering the team as the beat writer. But I've kind of, I always kind of said, oh, maybe the team just didn't treat him well, so he has a bone to pick there. But I also now I'm starting to kind of realize maybe he saw quite a few inner workings when he's there. And, he understands the many shortcomings of ownership. So there was a point today where they were talking. This is going to be a couple minutes here, so bear with us. I'm going to try and shorten it as much as possible. But it's Mike Florio and Peter King talking. And Peter King brings up an interesting point in terms of the Bengals potentially drafting a quarterback and a quandary they could be looking at picking a quarterback at the top of next year's draft.
Was when Bud Dupree forced the fumble on Andy Dalton in the first half. TJ Watt recovered it. That was when I said, why did I think the Bengals were going to win this game?
Yes.
And it was just relentless all night. And Peter, in the second half, and Booger McFarland pointed this out, you're down 21 points, and there's no sense of urgency. There's no sense of fight in the Bengals. And you can hide a lackluster performance in a cluster of 1 p.m. Eastern games on a Sunday. But when you're in prime time and the cameras are everywhere and they see the look on your face, and Andy Dalton just had that look of, I really don't want to be here anymore. That's a horrible look for the Bengals, and it suggests they're going to lose a lot more games this year.
I mean, you know what I found myself thinking last night, Mike? I said to myself, if you're Tua Tagovailoa or if you're Justin Herbert, you have to be watching that game and say, oh my God, please pick me first, Dolphins. Because you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. The Bengals are going to have the second pick in the draft. And there's going to be an outcry, and I think justifiably so, to take Andy Dalton's successor. There's nothing wrong with Andy Dalton. To me, he's a nice 24th, 28th quarterback in the league. But it's like year after year, you go along with Andy Dalton. It's like what the Giants did with Eli Manning. Are you competitive? Yes. Do you win some games? Yes. Are you a championship team? No, you're not. And I realize they have no line and they don't have A.J. Green. And I don't want to be unfair to Andy Dalton. All I'm saying is that the Cincinnati Bengals are going to have the second pick in a quarterback-rich draft. And when they have that pick, there's likely to be 2 players, and who knows, maybe there will be other guys because every year it changes between October and April. So who knows? But all I'm saying is I hope for any kid's sake that he doesn't get sentenced to play at Cincinnati.
So interesting stuff. Again, Peter King has an interesting perspective on the Cincinnati Bengals because he was their beat writer in the 80s. Saw some highs and lows with the team. And granted, he's always kind of seemingly had an axe to grind. I also don't like to use another, news outlets or blogs interview on our show, but I thought it was really interesting, and it brings up, we've got a few minutes to talk about this before Ed Smith comes on the show here, but I think it's something that needs to be maybe in the back of everybody's mind, especially if you're the Bengals front office and you are stuck in your ways and you are dead set on, hey, we may take a new quarterback, but we're not going to be aggressive in outside free agency. We're going to draft the way we always draft, that sort of thing. You may get into a situation, God forbid, where it's an Eli Manning, a John Elway. It happens very infrequently, but it happens. And if you remember, the Bengals had this happen to them in the 80s with a linebacker that ended up coming and coaching under Marvin Lewis, ironically. But it's happened. It's happened to this franchise. It has happened to other teams because quarterbacks who think they can dictate the draft a bit don't like the direction of the team. And I guess where I'm getting at, John, is do you foresee this? It's still early. We don't know how the rest of the season is going to play out. Do you foresee this being a potential issue with the Cincinnati Bengals in next year's draft if they go after one of these high quarterbacks?
My answer to that is what is enticing me to say no? Like what evidence is there for me to say that this wouldn't happen? Because me, as somebody who follows the Bengals, would say, oh, I would love my team to draft a franchise quarterback. And I wouldn't think that there would be any problems luring him in and convincing him to be a part of this organization. But what really objectively is convincing me to say no there? because I know that this organization is run like a small business and not like an actual NFL franchise. I know that their scouting department is the smallest in the NFL. I know they take pride with a lot of things that makes them different, but I also know that that agent survey from about a month ago about where players and coaches don't want to go and how Cincinnati ended up at the top of that is real. That stigma, that perception, that's very real. And if, by all means, a franchise quarterback like Tua or Herbert feels it's in their best interest to not go to a place that they don't think can set them up for success, who am I to say that they're wrong for that? Because I'm seeing what I'm seeing right now, 4 years of them just not doing what needs to be done to build around the team that they have. Like, what who am I to say that's a wrong assumption? I just don't, there's not enough evidence for me to say that won't happen. I would like to think it won't happen, but there's not enough evidence to say that it won't.
Correct. And I don't, that would be the ultimate slap in the face to the Bengals organization. There's been a lot of talk this week of fan boycott and, let's get a petition going and all that kind of stuff to make sure that the Bengals operate the way that all other NFL franchises basically operate, field a competitive team. The one thing that really kind of forces their hand are players wanting out. Or not even wanting in on the front end. So that would be a very interesting situation. Again, it's a big what if. It's down the road. It could happen. It's probably pretty rare, but it could happen. And some food for thought as we try and digest this 0-4 start and what happened to the Bengals in primetime on Monday Night Football. We're going to bring in a special guest in just 1 second, but you are listening to the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran. We are simultaneously streaming, if you're watching us live, on our YouTube channel as well as on the Facebook live video feed of Cincy Jungle. Wanted to also mention that those of you who tune into our podcast channel, who subscribe to our podcast channel, there are a number of different new shows along with our show, a number of different episodes that are coming at you basically every day of the week. So you've got our show that's on 2 or 3 times a week between the listener questions, our weekly show, and the post-game reaction. You have Orange is the New Black, the podcast from Ace Boogie and Zim Hude. You've got Matt Minnick's, Chalk Talk, where he does some film review, which is pretty awesome, and he debuted that last week, as well as Daddy-O McDucks and Dr. Hoji Smoji, right? There, sorry if I spit when I speak podcast. So all of that is on our channel, on our audio channel. So subscribe, get all of those. In case you are wondering where you can get this show, I mentioned iTunes, I mentioned cincyjungle.com, but it's also on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, and on Google Play, as well as the Megaphone platform. So get the show how you can. And John, I am going to have you introduce our very special guest to preview Week 5.
All right. So joining us now is the one and only Ed Smith, who is the host of the Believe in Cardinals podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. Ed was a former NFL player in the late 90s, most notably for the 1998 NFC Championship Atlanta Falcons. He also played overseas in the European Football League. So Ed, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How you gentlemen doing today?
We're hanging in there. We're hanging in there because, our football team's not very good and we're winless, kind of like the team that you guys are covering over there in Arizona.
Well, I chimed in a couple minutes early and I was listening to you fellas, and I can feel your pain, man. It's a rough start to the season, and I guess at this point, at least we have a tie out here in Arizona. You guys are 0-4, so I guess we can hang our hat on that at least.
Yeah, you're one ahead in the draft order, which I think for most fans is good for the Bengals because we're still looking for that quarterback. So Ed, we're going to start by previewing this game right now. And speaking of the quarterback, Kyler Murray, I guess, is the story out of Arizona and in that new spread offense that they have out there. They're leading the NFL in 10 personnel offense. I think 60% of their offensive plays right now are in 10 personnel. What are your first impressions with Cliff Kingsbury's offense out there?
Well, they held it a secret all through the preseason. They were going to unveil it on the NFL and basically be this high octane, multifaceted offense. And thus far, I'm still waiting to see what what the big secret was all along, because it's been pretty, as far as personnel groupings, obviously we're throwing a bunch of wide receivers out there, rarely using the tight end at all. And the running game, I have a lot of problems with that. Everything's out of the pistol formation. I don't necessarily think we have the right running back for that. But so far, man, it's been, I won't call it a bust yet, but as far as the excitement factor and what we're supposed to be, seeing this up tempo and high paced and all this different, ingenuity, I'm still waiting to see it. We haven't seen it yet. And it just looks like a college spread offense that's getting overmatched by NFL players to this point.
Ed, it's Anthony Cosenza. Welcome to the program. Great to have you on. Definitely remember you from the Dirty Bird days. Very fun team. Definitely remember that team, watching them, and a lot of fun. Very stoked to have you on. I guess aside from the winless thing, there are a lot of parallels with these two teams, right? I mean, they got the young, unproven head coach, the offensive mind guy. I guess the Cardinals are a bit ahead of the game because they got their number one overall quarterback last year. I'll go back to the coaching. I mean, what's kind of the feeling with Cliff Kingsbury right now? There's a lot of questions with the Bengals with Zach Taylor because they're winless. The offense has been a roller coaster. What are the feelings about Cliff Kingsbury and his future with the team? What the offense has looked like? Is it kind of on the upswing, or is it still tempered expectations?
Anthony, I wish I could tell you it's like on the upswing. Right now, it's a lot of holding your breath out here strictly because, like I said, what we were promised right out of the box, we haven't gotten that yet. The other question I have is because of, Cliff Kingsbury's background, college coach, unproven at that level as well. Didn't have a winning record in college, signs with USC. The Cardinals rushed to go scoop him up, I guess, because he had a cup of coffee with McVay out in Los Angeles. So, we're expecting this big genius to come in. The one concern I've had from the very beginning is this is the next level. You come from college, you come to the NFL. This is now, I'm not just responsible for the offense as a coordinator. I'm the CEO of this organization. And thus far, I've been waiting to see him put his stamp on the offense, on the entire organization. I'm waiting to see what their, the personality or identity of this team and organization is going to be. And I dare say every now and then I get the impression he's a little overmatched and over his skis in terms of trying to manage everything, prepare everything. I know, and I will say this as well, a lot of coaches around the league, they resent the young hot shots coming in and, right off the bat, we're going to show them. So, they pretty much throw everything but the kitchen sink at that young rookie head coach. And that's what I've seen so far. We're only a quarter of the way into the season, so it's not time to panic yet necessarily, but I need to see more progress on all fronts as far as the offense, as far as his control on the sidelines, as far as everything. So I'm still waiting to see that from our head coach here in Arizona.
Ed, the first injury report came out today, and wide receiver Christian Kirk was not practicing, and I believe they said Kingsbury said that they don't expect Kirk to play. Kirk is leading the team in targets right now, but you guys still have Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson out there. How are those guys doing in this new offense, and what would be the plan if you guys were to be without Kirk for this week?
Well, Larry is a consummate professional. I sometimes feel sorry for him, what he's gone through toward the latter part of his career out here in terms of the number of quarterbacks he's played with, the number of bad offenses. You guys got to remember, too, just last year we were going through this same drill with rookie head coach Wilkes and Rosen as our quarterback. Then you fast forward 1 year later and we're doing the same thing again with different pieces. But like I said, Larry is the anchor here in Arizona, does everything with class. I know if you ask him, like if you got a couple cocktails in him, he might confide in you, man, I wish it was a little easier out here. Because he loves it here as far as the city, what he does, what he means to the community. It's just so tough, man. And as far as, Christian Kirk being out, they're this young wide receiver group. I just said they're young and inexperienced, minus Larry. We brought Crabtree in here, which I thought was a huge mistake from the very beginning because we already had that veteran presence with Larry. Why bring Crabtree Crabtree in here, and then you see obviously just that quickly he's gone with no impact. So with Christian being out this week, if he is, it's going to be tough sledding, especially on the road. I know you guys probably don't, after what you guys experienced against Pittsburgh the other night, you don't have a whole lot of confidence, but we might be ready to boost your confidence a little bit coming in there as that wounded dog, So we'll see how this one plays out. But like I said, somebody's got to win, I guess, unless we end up with another tie, right?
Yeah. And Bengals fans are used to ties, especially during the Marvin Lewis era. We experienced a few of those. That's
yeah.
We're talking with Ed Smith, former member of the Super Bowl appearing Atlanta Falcons, the Dirty Birds in the late 90s. Glad to have him on. He runs the Cardinals Believe podcast, part of the Believe Network. I guess, like I said, there are a lot of parallels between these two teams, and offensive line issues probably have to be up there. One of the main knocks about the Cardinals, they got Rosen a couple of years ago, and folks kind of thought, well, maybe the surrounding talent wasn't there, including on the offensive line. Instead of it going that route, they get Kyler Murray. What's the offensive line been looking like? Have they lived up to their end of the bargain, or has Kyler Murray been able to mask some of these things because of his scrambling ability and maneuverability in the pocket?
It hasn't been a good fit so far, and as you bring up a couple great points, Anthony. The offensive line here has been probably one of the worst in recent history. Last year was incredibly bad. This year they tried to make a couple of improvements, but they waited till later rounds to even address it. Obviously, they went out, they got Kyler Murray, first pick in the draft, but then they go get wide receiver and cornerback help and stuff like that. Didn't address the offensive line either in the draft or necessarily in free agency. Within this offense, Kyler has been both a blessing and a curse because he's a very mobile quarterback. So a lot of, and then I'll bring up this point. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about it. And I'm 6'4", so I'm not, he's a short quarterback. Uh-huh. So they have to do a lot of stuff with him on the move to create, lines of sight for him. And then even when he scrambles, he's doing the same thing. The problem is the offensive linemen don't necessarily know where he's going to be probably 60-70% of the time. So he's always on the move, if it's a designed run or if he's scrambling. And, it just makes it so tough on them. At the same time, they're not very athletic. I've been waiting, and I've talked to a lot of people recently. They always ask me, well, what do you look for in an offensive line? And being a former tight end, I used to work with those guys hand and foot. And you want a little nasty in those guys. You want those guys, these are dudes that, as they play together and get to know each other, they're a nasty, just vile group. And I was joking with one of my buddies. I did a podcast yesterday. I told most of your linemen, the nasty ones, if your grandmother reached to get the last piece of chicken off the plate, they would smack the hell out of her because that's just the type of dudes they are. We don't have that here, for one. And then, like I said, with the combination of the offense trying to figure itself out, they're throwing the ball probably 75-80% of the time, which means they're in retreat mode, pass protecting rather, instead of being able to fire off the ball. So it's been a bad combination of everything. And I know they'll take a lot of blame. I think right now we're last in the NFL in sacks. I think we've given up 20 so far, which puts Kyler on the pace for somewhere near 80, I guess, or in that area. And some of those are on him, but a lot of them are on the offensive line. A lot of them are on the scheme itself that we're running.
And let's turn our attention to the defense here. I know a lot of people were interested with the number one overall pick and taking Nick Bosa because edge rusher opposite of Chandler Jones was an issue last year. But you guys did sign Terrell Suggs, and Suggs wasn't the only guy that you guys signed. Jordan Hicks was the guy that a lot of Bengals fans wanted to sign at linebacker. You guys put him in there as well. And you also drafted a guy, Byron Murphy, at the top of the second round at quarterback. What have the new additions on the defensive side of the ball been like, and how is that unit progressing from last year?
Well, last year they were in a 4-3. Wilkes took them to a 4-3, which was a huge mistake. They've always been a 3-4 out here in Arizona. Fortunately, we got Vance Johnson. He's taking them back to that formation. The problem is, I think a lot of guys are still trying to figure their way through the scheme. We've got Terrell on one side, Chandler Jones on the other. So you got two great bookends over there. They're putting some pressure on quarterbacks. Minus, and here's the big factor for us out here, minus Patrick Peterson leading that secondary. We've got a young, inexperienced secondary. So which in my equation, that means you have to put even more pressure on the quarterback, because if you let him sit back there, he's going to have way too much time to pick apart that young, inexperienced secondary back there. Another factor, man, tight ends. Every tight end who's come, who we played against this year, we've put in our vote to make them the NFC Pro Bowl representative, because tight ends are just killing us this year. And a lot, they just released DJ Swearinger, and part of the, I guess, report was he was a big problem in terms of helping them, like back there covering the tight ends and everything. But we've had some issues, like sometimes we're stout against the run, sometimes we're not. Sometimes we get beat on the back end of the defense. Sometimes we hold up. It's been a mismatch, just like the offensive side. We're still trying to find that identity once again, and I'll throw the word out there, trying to get that nasty out there too. We got a lot of, tackling was a big concern for me in the preseason. We didn't want to tackle anybody. It was like we were out there playing flood, doing practice, and, teams were just running through us. Been a little better so far in the first 4 games. We're still looking to shore up some of those holes, get like a full group effort, meaning getting pressure up front, getting some coverage in the back, creating more turnovers. We're kind of middle of the pack as far as doing that. We have been a little more successful in terms of going after the ball, creating some fumbles. But, like I said, on all sides of the ball, we're still just trying to figure it out here and kind of identify what we really have.
Man, mirrors reflection. Good Lord.
Yeah.
This is crazy. The trade deadline's coming up, and there's always kind of a fine line to walk with teams that have little to no wins at that point in the season. Are you buyers or are you sellers? So, maybe for the Bengals standpoint, they may have some guys that, since they didn't get their quarterback last year, maybe they want to sell some of their guys to collect draft picks and move up, around, whatever. The Cardinals already have their quarterback, so maybe they want to get a piece to continue to build around Kyler Murray or what have you. If the Cardinals were to make it, well, first of all, do you think they'll make a move? And if they were, would they be buyers or would they be sellers, you think?
I'm not sure if they're in the market to do either. I think right now, especially because this is Cliff Kingsbury's first year, he came in, took over the mess that was last year. They're still trying to sort things out to figure out exactly what they have. When he came in, obviously he's taken over pretty much a mess. He's trying to, find out what he has. In terms, basically every position other than a couple are under review at this point. So you got to kind of figure out what you have, kind of go from there. My question would be, how much do we really have in Arizona that anybody would want to buy if we did, if we put our stuff out there? It's almost like you're on the street and you drive by a garage sale. You can tell usually from the curb, it's like, I don't think I even want to stop in there. Or, hey, I see a couple nice pieces. I don't know whether we have a whole bunch here that anybody would want. And as far as being a buyer at this point, I think that's probably out of the question. I think the biggest thing for the Cardinals, they would want to keep what they have, assess it, not get rid of too much, not pull too much in, because we all know this isn't going to be a winning year here in Arizona. I'd be interested to figure what you guys thought as far as what Cincinnati is doing, primarily because we have already, and I think either one of you might have mentioned it earlier, we are in the rebuild mode. Are they deciding whether it's time to do the same thing in Cincy? You guys are in that, evaluation in terms of coming into the season, especially when like somebody like Ben gets hurt in Pittsburgh, and you got the rookie, second-year quarterback in Baltimore. You're still trying to figure out whether we still have a chance to compete. But it could be one of those situations where you're in the same boat a year from now.
Talking with Ed Smith of the Cardinals Believe podcast. Ed, we're going to get you out of here with your prediction real quick, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about a former Bengals player who was just inducted into the Cardinals Ring of Honor last week. And I bet if that game was this game was home against the Cardinals, probably would have been against that. Carson Palmer was just inducted into the Ring of Honor, and I know he's a polarizing figure with Bengals fans himself. For me personally, I've always been on Carson Palmer's side of the whole debacle of how he left. What were your thoughts on him being inducted into the Ring of Honor, even as a player who only played there for about 4 years? And what are your thoughts on Carson Palmer in general?
John, that's a great point to bring up, because when they decided to put him in the Ring of Honor, I literally thought wait a minute, I would have figured Cincinnati put him in before we put him in because he's only here a few years. I guess that shows how much they thought of him as a player, but I didn't see the longevity for them to open up the ring to cost him. I think it's a great honor though because he's a great dude and he had a great career. So I applaud the organization for doing it, and I know he was honored. I saw the induction myself on the TV. So I'm assuming one day you guys might do the same over there in Cincinnati, but he's revered, in the same manner, I guess. I'm not sure.
And let's, the Carson Palmer thing, we could do an entire episode on Carson Palmer. So, and who knows exactly how that conversation would fully go. But Ed, first of all, before let's get your prediction, and then let's hear about how people can hear from you, get in touch with you, all that good stuff.
Man, you put me on the spot, and I know it's coming because we all have to make our picks. Cardinals coming in as a 3.5-point dog, and I think I have to honor that. You guys are going to get your first win. I'm looking at probably a semi-sloppy game, 20-16, let's call it. Bengals cover. As far as being in touch, like I said, I do the Believe in the Arizona Cardinals podcast every Saturday. Every Wednesday, as far as every Saturday out here in Phoenix. My partner, Devon Adams, who just saw pop in the back, we're actually going to do our podcast in a little bit here. But we do a radio show on NBC Sports Radio 360 AM, Easy Sports Talk every Saturday from 10 to 12. And speaking of that, I would love to have you guys come on our show one of these Saturdays. So we'd love to have you come on, talk football in general, and especially you guys in the Bengals.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'd love to do that. We can talk on the side and figure something out. We appreciate the invitation. We'd love to have you. It's been our pleasure having you on, Ed. I appreciate you making the time on for our show. This is we teased at the beginning. This is not really a matchup that is seen very often. So we're glad when we can get a quality guy like yourself on our program. And Arizona does have, I've got a little soft spot for it. My oldest niece just started going to U of A, and I've got an aunt and uncle who live in Sun City, right outside of Phoenix, Scottsdale-ish area there. So know the area well. I've been to that stadium. So really cool area. So good to have you on. Just, if that invitation stands, we'd love to take you up on that. We can
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm over in Peoria, which is only about 10 minutes or so from Sun City. So I might have passed some of your relatives on the street, man.
There you go. Cool. Well, thanks for making the time, Ed. Appreciate it. Enjoy your week.
Guys.
All right. That was Ed Smith, part of the Super Bowl appearing Atlanta Falcons, and now the head guy at Cardinal, the Believe in Cardinals podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. If you remember, we had Eric Davis, former Super Bowl champion with the 49ers, on our program a couple weeks ago. So a lot of former pro athletes that have turned podcasters coming on this program, and I got to thank John Sheeran for setting both of those interviews up. Awesome. Both those guys brought it, and a lot of fun. So appreciate it, John. Absolutely.
And I only wanted to ask the Carson question because I knew we'd get the comments section riled up, and I can see that definitely.
Yeah, we could have made the whole interview about that. So, but that was good question, and a lot of good stuff there. It's interesting. I kind of thought that he would be more like a bit more positive about the direction of things, but I guess when you're winless and you've got a new coach, new quarterback, and you're a little antsy, you want to see a little bit more results than 0-3-1 at this point that the Cardinals are sporting. So interesting that he also picked the Bengals to win after such a terrible showing by Cincinnati.
He went with Vegas. I can't really argue with that.
Yeah, I guess he did. We'll see. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We appreciate you joining us, whether it's on the Cincy Jungle Facebook live feed or on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you joining us, and you can get this program on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Google Play, on Megaphone. I mentioned YouTube, and then all of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com. We will be doing a listener questions show, standalone show on Friday, so join us for that. And if we end up going on Ed's show, probably you would do that, John, since you've created the relationship there. If one of us or both of us go on that show, we will definitely get you the links and information on that. That would be a lot of fun to do that too. So appreciate Ed coming on and talking some Cardinals with us. Do you have a prediction for that one, John?
I really have no idea, because I know for as bad as the Bengals are, the Cardinals are equally worse. My whole thing is like
Equally worse. I love it.
Like, I don't know, man. Like, Kyler Murray just scares the crap out of me for what they can do with him against the Bengals. I'm just not sure they will do that. If they have a brain and they know what this defense is capable of in terms of being a complete crap show, Kyler Murray can run all over this defense if they do this right. And I think a lot of people are forgetting that David Johnson's still there, and he's not having that good of a year as a runner, but I think they're implementing him more in the passing game, so he can do some damage too. Like, they have a lot of people injured. I know Kirk is one of them. Like, some guys on defense are also out of practice right now. Like, they have the potential to win this game by 1 or 2 scores, but at the end of the day, like, you know, if they're still having a lot of shortcomings in terms of scheme and play calling like the Bengals are, this game could be a lot closer than we think. And I guess that's what the 3-point spread is reflecting. And also, it's a home game for the Bengals, and you have to wonder, based off, you know, how they looked on Monday, how much of a home field advantage they're really going to have. Like, are we about to see the effect of what we saw at the end of last year in terms of just that stadium being desolate and empty already in the first week of October? I don't know if it's going to be that bad, but I think this game is going to be close because 2 inept teams are not going to be able to get over themselves.
Yeah, I think to your point about Kyler Murray, this team, whether it's Marvin Lewis, whether it was in his early years when the Mike Zimmer days were around, this team has always had issues with mobile quarterbacks. Always. I mean, there are very few exceptions like a Johnny Manziel or something like that, but almost always this team struggles against a Deshaun Watson. You can go all the way back to Cordell Stewart if you want. This team has always struggled against mobile quarterbacks, especially ones they have not seen before. So that is something to look at when you look at this matchup. I think if the Bengals do win, it'll be one of those frustrating things where Kyler Murray makes a lot of plays with his legs, avoids a lot of tackles, and it would be win ugly, I guess, if that were to take place. So I don't know. Speaking of wins and what that would mean for the Bengals going forward, let's talk some news and notes and the impact of as to what that means for the Bengals in 2019, 2020, and beyond. Some interesting news to begin the week. It started with Andre Smith, the guy who is relieving Cordy Glenn, and who, by the way, never played left tackle in the NFL, never started at left tackle really until this year. He's always been a right tackle, and oddly enough, the Bengals think he's a starting left tackle at the end of his career. Regardless, he got abused, as well as Bobby Hart last week. He had an arm injury. We're not quite sure how severe that one is, so his status is kind of up in the air. The Bengals were still dealing with Carl Lawson having a hamstring injury. We'll see when his return is. And unfortunately, it came out today, speaking of offensive line, and that not really looking to get better anytime soon. Cordy Glenn is still dealing with the concussion issue. They've already announced he will not play this week after doing some things last week. Is it time for him to is it IR time for him?
IR permanently, maybe. That's a situation I just would not want to be in. And I don't know, man. Like that, like he was limited last week, I guess, doing like some work with his helmet on, and I guess he experienced some type of setback in almost 2 months now since that first concussion. Like, you have to be thinking long term at this point. And we've talked about this before, but definitely I would think that IR should be on the table right now.
Yeah, it's not looking good for him. not looking good for him at all. And you got to feel pretty bad for him that this concussion situation is just lingering and lingering. It's just not good there. Speaking of the walking wounded, John Ross took, it was a big hit. He kind of got slammed to the turf, but he's a little guy. He's had injury issues in the past. All of a sudden, this is kind of a somewhat major shoulder injury. They haven't really, I don't think, as of Wednesday, classified what it is, whether it's a broken collarbone or whatever. They said it's not.
They did classify, and I'm prepared to try to pronounce it on live YouTube.
Okay. They did classify
Sternoclavicular, I think. Which is the same one that Darqueze Dennard suffered last year against the Steelers that kept him out for about 2 months, I think.
Yeah. So he's now on IR, maybe scheduled to return depending on, there's a couple of guys on there now, Darius Phillips, John Ross, maybe even Jonah Williams that they could designate to return if things go well. Probably Darius Phillips is, I would assume, it sounded like the most likely, but who knows at this point. But now it also appears that AJ Green is not going to play this week. John Ross is out. He's been the most frustrating and the most explosive weapon the Bengals have had, and from a pass catching standpoint. I don't know, man. Were you surprised that this was this serious?
I mean, at this point, every scouting report that they do for college players is to be like, okay, how strong are their shoulders? Because now this is John Ross missing with a torn labrum his rookie year. Jonah Williams with, I believe, another labrum issue. Sternoclavicular injury for Ross. I think the one with last year with Dennard. This is just the story of Ross, man. Like, he's just not durable at all. And I think you would have expected 8 to 12 games with him this year, based on the first 2 years. And now 8 games is looking like the most that he's going to play if he even comes back. So it's unfortunate, and I was glad that he was productive in the games he did play. But until you can prove that you're going to be durable, you're just not going to be that much of an asset in the NFL.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to turn this a little bit into, do you think that these moves and whatnot, do you think that is pointing to the team potentially tanking, just kind of stashing guys on IR and moving guys up? And it's now turned into a 2019 as an evaluation year to see who we have, who's sticking around in 2020, who's not. Maybe wins aren't really at a premium after an 0-4 start and they need to reevaluate everything. The team would never tell you that. It still maddens me that, hey, if we're healthy, we can win. If we're healthy, we can win. And yet here we are, and nobody's healthy. Nobody important players are healthy.
No, and even if they were healthy, this would be like a name-made team probably, based off the coaching and based off of what the talent is there now. But at this point, it's all about evaluation, man. It's all about evaluating the players who are healthy, who are out there, to see are they going to be a part of this long term. Because it's just a thinking process of realization. It took a lot of people a long time to realize that, hey, this team's not very good. And for some teams, it's easy to become good after not being good. But for some teams like the Bengals, it's not going to happen overnight. So the next realization after them not being good is they're not going to be good for a little bit, maybe like 2 or 3 years. I think 2 years was the timeline starting this year if they do enough things for this offseason. And unfortunately, they didn't do enough things this offseason. They didn't really solve offensive line. They didn't really solve linebacker. They didn't actually draft a real quarterback. So now they have to do all these other things to basically start this rebuild. And it all starts with, okay, what talent is worth keeping around right now? And you can only evaluate what you have out there. And unfortunately, they just need to construct a roster that is capable of withstanding the hits that they always take, because you just cannot trust this team to stay healthy.
Yeah. And I mean, that goes back to, again, the scouting portion, the medical staff portion. If you're going to rely on that kind of stuff, you got to beef up those staffs as much as possible. So not a good look in terms of the injury front for the Bengals as they head into this one. So if they're going to win this game, it's going to be with a cast of characters that are reserves or new faces or both. So, not not looking good. Some people are kind of promoting this one question in our live YouTube chat. Basically, if it was from Subdued Base, if the losing continues, any chance anybody gets fired? If so, I think it's someone on the lower assistant rankings, like a Jim Turner or somebody like that. I don't think
I would sanction that.
Yeah,
some people on this podcast didn't support Jim Turner from the get-go, and people got blamed for that. But he's never been a good offensive line coach, despite what some people have said. But and that's exactly what, yeah.
Well, yeah, I know. That's really the only thing I could. I mean, I think the Bengals are going to let stuff ride as it is right now. They probably deep down, even though they don't want to say anything or talk about it, they probably were saying, this is an evaluation year. We've got to give Zach Taylor some time to, make this roster in his image and get guys that are Taylor guys. But right now, it's the product on the field, even with similar injuries. The product on the field right now seems a lot worse than what we saw at the end of last year. There are some steps being taken backwards, especially this last week. Week 2 and week 4 especially. So, and maybe this is just what you expect from this team. It's maybe you get the close game and then you get blown out, and maybe you get a win here and there, and then you get blown out. Maybe that's the ebbs and flows that comes with this inexperienced staff and the injuries.
Like they're just not good. They're just not good yet, and they're not going to be good for a little while unless they drastically change how they build a roster. And expecting a rookie head coach to come in and completely make everything okay, make a bad roster good, and turn out more wins than last year, it was always unrealistic. And the only reason why I thought they would win one more game last year was I thought they would be healthier. I thought they would be luckier in close games. Regression usually happens to most teams, but there are some teams who just stay in the basement for a long time because they just don't do enough things. And right now, that's what the Bengals are. They're a losing franchise. They have been for the past 4 years, and that doesn't change until drastic change happens. We started with overhauling the coaching staff. Now it's on the roster.
Yeah. This roster needs a lot. I mean, someone's accusing us of I don't know if it's an accusation. It's someone saying, I love it when Cincy Jungle tries to polish the turd that is the Bengals. Well, I mean, we can write and podcast about just how terrible everybody is and all of that. If you want us to talk about that for an hour, we can do that. I feel like we actually have kind of done that a little bit today, but it's not, the team's not in a good state. It's not in a good state, and I don't know how much you can expect it to improve based on some of the operating modes that this team engages in. They got to make some changes. They have to make some changes. Otherwise, they're not setting up their coaches. They're inexperienced coaches, and their quarterback that they seemingly love, they're not setting them up to be successful. I do want to give one quick shout out before we get out of here, John. Robert Lacey Jr. is in the live YouTube chat. He has either called us after the show was done, concluded recording, or he just called us a little bit ago, I think, when we were talking with Ed Smith, so we were unable to talk to him. But he leaves very insightful voice messages. He gets in touch with the show, and he does watch the program. So I just wanted to give a little acknowledgement specifically to Robert. He's very complimentary and very insightful as a Bengals fan, but he's also very fed up. That is very apparent on his voicemails. So, Robert, I just wanted to say hello to you specifically, and I apologize we keep missing you, but we'll get you on one of our shows here in the future when we can properly connect things. Any final thoughts from you, John, as we close up shop here?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to rename Andel to Andy Dalton if he has to play another game behind the offensive line. Here you go, Randall. Let's put you in front and center. This is Andy Dalton, another game on the offensive line.
Yeah, the mouth actually is it's almost like an Andy Dalton face that we saw on Monday Night Football, both in frustration and shock. And I don't know.
Oh no, it's Bobby Hart getting beaten again.
Oh, if only Randall knew he would be such a mascot. Unfortunately, those of you on the Facebook Live aren't getting John's video feed. You have to go to YouTube for that one. But you got to check out what we're talking about with Randall. It's a somewhat inside joke. So you have to check it out. Appreciate it, John. Appreciate it, Randall, I guess. Randall's taking over for John for the next couple of seconds here. As I've mentioned, you can get this show on cincyjungle.com. All of the content, news, opinions, analysis, injury news, all that stuff is on cincyjungle.com. You can get this show on our YouTube channel, so subscribe there. And you can get it basically anywhere you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, and you can get many other now different podcasts that are on our channel, our podcast channel. So check those out. A lot of good stuff coming, and really getting you a lot of stuff throughout the week. So check that out. And our thanks once again to Ed Smith of the Believe in Cardinals podcast network. Very cool interview and insightful. Hopefully both these teams start to find an upswing. Hopefully, depending on how you're looking at the Bengals right now, I don't know. Hopefully the Bengals find their upswing this week. For some of you want to see them continue on the downslide. We'll see. But interesting game nonetheless coming down the pike this week, even though it probably won't move the national needle all that much. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thanks for joining us live, submitting us questions, comments. Join us Friday afternoon, Friday evening, depending on your time zone, to talk some more Bengals. We will be fielding your questions, both ones we saw tonight that we weren't able to get to, as well as ones that you have sent to us or continue to send to us throughout the week. We apologize we didn't get to calls this week on this week's weekly episode, but we will do that later this week, so please join us. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.